Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we turn our gaze eastward, to a world steeped in silks, secrets, and silent power. You're drifting now, aren't you? Across the shimmering waters of the Bosphorus, the minarets of Istanbul piercing the twilight sky like needles of silver. The air is thick with the scent of spices and jasmine, the distant clamour of the city a low rhythmic hum. You're entering the heart of the Ottoman Empire, not the grand palaces you've seen in textbooks, but a hidden, swirling vortex of influence and intrigue known as the harem. This isn't a place of quiet seclusion. It's a world where a woman's whisper could topple an army, and a single glance could seal a man's fate. A world where the most formidable rulers weren't always the men on the throne, but the women who pulled their strings from behind the lattice screens. You probably won't survive this, not really. The political landscape is more treacherous than any battlefield, and the stakes are life and death. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is, and we'll be connected across the globe, united by this shared twilight journey. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a guest in the world of the Ottoman Empire, an era that stretches from the 14th to the early 20th century, a time of staggering power and immense complexity. For most of its history, the Sultan was an absolute monarch, the caliph of all Sunni Muslims. His word was law, his armies invincible. You'd think this would be a man's world, a parade of mustachioed pashas and war-hardened generals, but you'd be wrong. For a period of well over a century, a remarkable chapter known as the Sultanate of Women unfurled, a time when the most potent political figures were, in fact, women. This wasn't a sudden revolution. It was a slow, subtle shift, a creeping vine of influence that eventually choked the traditional male power structure. The story begins with a simple, almost overlooked fact. The traditional Ottoman succession system was a mess. Unlike European monarchies where the eldest son inherited the crown, the Ottomans operated under a system of fratricide. The moment a new sultan was enthroned, he was expected to execute all his brothers to prevent any rival claims. It was brutal, effective, and deeply destabilizing. The mothers of these princes, however, had a vested interest in their sons surviving, and a potential sultan's mother could become incredibly powerful. She would be the Valid Sultan, the mother of the reigning monarch, and her influence was vast. You're walking through a long, polished hallway, the scent of expensive incense hanging in the air. The walls are tiled in a mosaic of blue and white, and the only sound is the soft rustle of your silk clothes. This is not the public face of the palace, but the private chambers, the home of the harem. The word harem, you should know, means forbidden or sacred, and it was a world unto itself. It housed not just the sultan's wives and concubines, but also his mother, his sisters, his daughters, and a vast network of female servants and eunuchs. It was a school, a bank, a political hub, and a social order all in one. Here a girl could arrive as a slave, taken in a raid or sold by her family, and rise through the ranks to command the respect of the entire empire. The most mainstream historical fact about this era is that the Sultanate of Women was, at its core, a response to a series of weak or young sultans. It started in the mid-16th century with Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, a man whose reign was long and prosperous, but whose personal choices set the stage for this new dynamic. His love for a single woman, Hürrem Sultan, broke centuries of tradition and opened the door for a new kind of power. Before Hürrem, sultans would have children with many different concubines, ensuring no single woman could become too powerful. But Suleiman chose to make Hürrem his legal wife, a move that would have been shocking at the time, and their children were the only ones in the line of succession. This single act elevated Hürrem to a position of unprecedented influence, a position that her successors would leverage to an even greater degree. This raises an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the Sultanate of Women was a golden age of female empowerment or a period of political decay that weakened the empire. Some scholars see these women as shrewd, capable politicians who kept the empire running during times of male incompetence. Others view them as selfish, power-hungry figures whose intrigues and rivalries destabilized the state and drained its coffers. You can't help but wonder if both views are a little bit right. You find yourself in a courtyard, the sun warm on your face. A little fountain gurgles, its sound like a lullaby. The women around you, dressed in vibrant silks, are not just beautiful, they're powerful. You see a woman with a keen, sharp gaze dictating a letter to a scribe. Another is counting a large stack of gold coins. A third is surrounded by a group of younger girls teaching them embroidery and etiquette. This is the inner sanctum, where the rules of the outside world don't apply, and where a woman's intelligence, charm and ambition could take her further than any man in the empire could have imagined. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the harem's hierarchy was so strict and regimented that there was a designated harem police, the Kislar Aga, or Chief Black Eunuch, who enforced the rules with an iron fist, but who also often became a close confidant and political advisor to the most powerful women. He controlled the flow of information and access, making him a gatekeeper of immense power in his own right. It's a reminder that even in this world of female dominance, the men who served them were still a critical part of the system. The women of the harem were not just passive figures waiting for a sultan's attention. They were educated, literate and trained in everything from music and poetry to diplomacy and accounting. They were taught to manage vast households, to understand complex financial matters, and to navigate the treacherous currents of court politics. It was a finishing school for power brokers. As you stand there, you realise that the story of the Sultanate of Women isn't just about these remarkable individuals. It's about a system that, through a series of historical accidents and cultural shifts, allowed for an unprecedented concentration of power in the hands of women. It was a brief, dazzling and ultimately fleeting moment in history, a window into a world where a woman's word could move mountains, even if she couldn't be seen or heard by the common people. We're on the cusp of meeting the first of these incredible women, a woman who came from nothing to become the legal wife of the greatest sultan the empire had ever known, a woman who, with nothing but her wits and her heart, changed the course of history forever. You're still there, aren't you? Drifting in the scented air of the harem, the echoes of 1,000 years of whispered secrets surrounding you. The light filtering through the stained glass windows now catches the dust motes dancing in the air, a silent blizzard of history. Now, let's focus our gaze on a single figure, a woman who didn't just survive this world, she remade it in her own image. Her story begins not in a palace, but in a small village in what is now Ukraine. She was a girl named Alexandra, a Ruthenian Orthodox priest daughter, and her life was quiet, predictable. Until, one day, it wasn't. You can almost hear the shouts, the panicked prayers, as Tatar slave raiders descended upon her village. She was captured, a scared, bewildered teenager, and forced to march for endless days, a cog in a human caravan bound for the slave markets of Istanbul. Can you imagine the terror, the humiliation, the sheer crushing loss of everything you've ever known? She arrived in the Ottoman capital as a nameless commodity, destined for a life of servitude. But this girl, Alexandra, had a spirit that refused to be broken. She was beautiful, yes, with fiery red hair and a sharp wit, but it was her intelligence and her sheer force of will that would change her destiny. She was sold into the imperial harem, a place where 1,000 other girls just like her vied for the attention of a single man, the Sultan. Most would live out their lives in obscurity, serving as maids or musicians, forgotten footnotes in a royal household. But not her. Her wit, her laughter, her bright, intelligent eyes caught the attention of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. He was a man who ruled an empire stretching from Hungary to Iran, a poet and a scholar as well as a warrior. He was used to getting what he wanted, but with her it was different. She wasn't just another beautiful face, she was a spark of life, a brilliant mind. He gave her a new name, Hurrem, which means the joyful one. Hurrem Sultan's story is a mainstream historical fact, but the way she navigated the court was anything but mainstream. She didn't rely on quiet submission or demure grace. She used her charm, her intelligence, and her uncanny understanding of human nature to become the single most influential person in the Sultan's life. The other women in the harem and the Sultan's mother, the Valide Sultan, were traditionalists. They expected Hurrem to be a temporary distraction, a passing fancy. But Hurrem was playing a different game entirely. She was building a dynasty. Remember that earlier. I mentioned the tradition of not marrying concubines to prevent any single woman from becoming too powerful. Hurrem shattered that tradition. Through a mixture of love, persuasion, and a dash of brilliant political manoeuvring, she convinced Suleiman to do something unheard of. He married her. The marriage of a sultan to a former slave was a seismic event, a scandal that reverberated across the empire. It elevated her from a concubine to a legal wife, and it meant that their children, and their children alone, were legitimate heirs to the throne. This was a direct assault on the power of the other mothers in the harem, and a clear signal that the old rules were changing. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this period is the sheer volume of letters they exchanged. The long-distance romance between Suleiman and Hürrem is a treasure trove for historians. While Suleiman was off on military campaigns, they would write each other poetry and intimate letters. It wasn't just flowery verse. These letters often contained coded political advice and discussions about court matters. It shows a level of partnership and intellectual respect that was entirely new. For example, in one letter, Suleiman even jokes that her passionate letters make him blush and feel like an inexperienced young lover. It's a glimpse behind the curtain of their public personas, revealing a genuine and profound connection. Hürrem's influence wasn't just limited to her husband's heart. She became a formidable political force in her own right. She became a close confidant to Suleiman, advising him on matters of state and foreign policy. She corresponded with foreign dignitaries, including the King of Poland, and used her position to promote her sons and her political allies. She understood the power of patronage and used her vast wealth to build mosques, schools, and a famous public bathhouse, the Haseki Hürrem Sultan Bathhouse, which still stands in Istanbul today. This wasn't just charity, it was a way of solidifying her power and winning public support. Hürrem also faced a powerful rival, Mahidevran Sultan, the mother of Suleiman's eldest son Mustafa. Mustafa was the heir apparent, and Mahidevran saw Hürrem as a threat to her son's future. The rivalry between these two women was legendary, a ruthless battle for the Sultan's affections and the throne. The details are fuzzy, but there are stories of physical altercations and constant plotting. Ultimately, Hürrem's superior position and political savvy won out. Mustafa was executed by his father on charges of treason, a move that is still hotly debated by historians. It paved the way for one of Hürrem's sons to inherit the throne, but it also cemented Hürrem's reputation as a ruthless and ambitious figure, and that leads us to an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Hürrem was a calculating villain who manipulated her husband and orchestrated the death of an innocent man, or a brilliant strategist who was simply doing what was necessary to ensure the survival and security of her own children in a brutally competitive environment. Was she a monster, or a mother protecting her brood? The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle. She was a product of her time, a woman who found herself in a man's world and learned to play the game better than they did. You're now sitting in a plush divan, a gentle breeze stirring the curtains. The room is quiet, the air cool. You're contemplating this woman, Hürrem. She was a slave who became a queen, a foreigner who became the most powerful woman in the Ottoman Empire. She broke tradition, bent the rules, and established a new model of female power. She laid the groundwork for the Sultanate of Women, creating a path that other women would follow for over a century. Her story is a testament to the power of a single individual to change the course of history, to defy the expectations of their time, and to build a legacy that would long outlast them. As you watch the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky, you can't help but wonder what her next move will be. The air around you feels different now. The scent of jasmine has been replaced by the rich, complex aroma of simmering spices and the metallic tang of gold. Hürrem Sultan has done her part, and now you're watching her legacy unfold, a new chapter written in the soft rustle of silk and the sharp click of political chess pieces. You're no longer in a world where a sultan's love is the only currency. You're in a world where a daughter's loyalty and a well-placed marriage are the new building blocks of power. The stage is set for a woman who was born into the purple, a princess who inherited her mother's ambition and her father's empire-shaping vision. You're about to meet Mihrimah Sultan, the cherished daughter of Suleiman and Hürrem, a woman who wielded power not from a position of conquest, but from one of birthright. She grew up in the gilded cage of the Topkapi Palace, but this was no ordinary childhood. She watched her mother, Hürrem, navigate the treacherous currents of the court, learning the subtle arts of persuasion and patronage. She saw firsthand how power could be wielded from behind the scenes. Her father, Suleiman, adored her. The name Mihrimah means sun and moon, a testament to the light she brought into his life. He saw in her not just a daughter, but a confidant and a political asset. And as she grew, she understood the immense value of that affection. She learned to use it, not for personal gain, but to strengthen her family's position and her mother's political agenda. The mainstream historical fact here is that Mihrimah Sultan was used by her parents as a strategic asset in a marriage alliance. When she came of age, she was married to Rustem Pasha, who would eventually become the Grand Vizier, the most powerful official in the empire after the Sultan himself. You'd think this was a simple marriage of state, a political pawn given to a powerful man. But it was far more complex. This wasn't just about cementing an alliance. It was about placing a trusted family member at the highest level of executive power. Mihrimah wasn't just a wife. She was the eyes and ears of the harem in the heart of the government. Her marriage gave her an unparalleled level of access and influence, and she used it to support her mother's political goals. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the story of her unrequited love. The chief architect of the Ottoman Empire, Mimar Sinan, was said to have been madly in love with Mihrimah. He built 2 mosques for her, one on the European side of Istanbul and one on the Asian side. The legend says that he built them to be a romantic tribute. On the day of the spring equinox, as the sun sets behind the minaret of the mosque on the European side, the moon rises from behind the minaret of the mosque on the Asian side. A beautiful, silent declaration of a love that could never be. It's a reminder that even in this world of cold political calculation, human passions still thrived, albeit in secret. Mihrimah's influence was profound. She didn't just whisper in her husband's ear, she actively participated in policy-making. She and her mother were a formidable team. She would gather information from her husband, Rustem Pasha, and relay it to Hürrem. Together they would strategize, making sure their family's interests were protected. They were the ultimate political duo. Their biggest target, Prince Mustafa, the eldest son of Suleiman and his first wife, Mahidevran. Mustafa was popular with the Janissaries and the people, and he was a constant threat to Hürrem's sons, one of whom was the future Sultan Selim II. Mihrimah, along with her mother and husband, orchestrated a campaign to turn Suleiman against his eldest son. Rustem Pasha was instrumental in this, planting seeds of doubt and feeding the Sultan false information about Mustafa's supposed rebellious intentions. The plan worked, and Mustafa was executed by his own father. The throne was secured for Hürrem's lineage, but at a terrible price. This leads to an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Mihrimah was a ruthless power broker driven by political ambition, or a loyal daughter simply doing what was necessary to protect her mother and her brothers in a system where the stakes were life and death. Did she act out of genuine malice, or was she simply playing the game to its brutal conclusion? It's easy to see her as a villain, but from her perspective, she was just ensuring the survival of her family. In the world of the Ottoman court, you were either the hammer or the nail. She chose to be the hammer. Mihrimah wasn't just a political operator, she was also a patron of the arts and a philanthropist on a grand scale. Like her mother, she used her immense wealth to commission magnificent architectural projects. She built mosques, schools, hospitals and water systems. These weren't just vanity projects. They were a way of building her own power base, a way of earning the love and respect of the people. Her charity was a form of political capital, and it made her one of the most beloved figures in the empire. She was a woman of immense influence, not just through her family connections, but through her own actions. You're walking now through the sprawling courtyards of the Topkapi Palace. The sounds of the city a distant murmur. You see her, Mihrimah, a woman in her prime, her face serene but her eyes sharp and intelligent. She's a queen without a crown, a monarch without a throne. She moves with a quiet authority, a living testament to the power of a woman in a man's world. Her influence was subtle, but it was everywhere. She pulled the strings from behind the scenes, shaping policy and securing the future of the empire. She was the final piece in Hürrem's puzzle, the living proof that the Sultanate of Women was not a fluke, but a new and powerful reality. Her story is a bridge, linking the personal ambition of Hürrem to the institutional power of the later Validi sultans. She showed that a woman could be born into privilege and use it not for a life of luxury, but for a life of purpose and political power. She was a force of nature, a woman who proved that a princess could be as formidable as any sultan, and that the greatest empires are often built not with swords, but with marriage contracts and whispered advice. Her legacy would live on in the women who came after her, a blueprint for a new kind of power. As you watch her walk away, you can't help but feel a sense of anticipation for what comes next. The stage has been set, and the next Valid Sultan is about to arrive. You're still here, aren't you? The air is thicker now, cooler, the grand corridors of Topkapi Palace stretching out before you like an endless labyrinth. The silent dance of power continues, but the players have changed. Hürrem and Mihrama have faded into history, their legacies secured. Now, a new woman steps into the light, and her story is a testament to the incredible global reach of the Ottoman Empire. She wasn't born in the heart of Anatolia, or the steppes of Eastern Europe. She was born in Venice, a jewel of the Italian Renaissance, a city of merchants and masters of the sea. She was a woman named Cecilia Venier Baffo, and she would become Nurbanu Sultan, the first Valide Sultan to truly command the empire. Her story is, in some ways, a mirror of Hürrem's. She was captured by privateers and sold into slavery, a young girl torn from her home and family. The fact that she was Venetian, from a prominent noble family no less, is a mainstream historical fact that gives her story an extra layer of intrigue. Venice and the Ottoman Empire were bitter rivals, locked in a perpetual struggle for control of the Mediterranean. But they were also trading partners, and the flow of people, goods, and ideas between them was constant. Nurbanu was a product of this complex relationship. A high-born Italian girl who had come to rule the empire that was Venice's greatest enemy. She was brought to the harem and eventually caught the eye of Prince Selim, the future Sultan Selim II, Hürrem's son. She was intelligent, beautiful, and possessed a unique sophistication that set her apart. Hürrem, the seasoned political veteran, saw her potential immediately. She groomed Nurbanu, teaching her the intricate rules of the court and the brutal realities of power. Hürrem saw in her a way to extend her own legacy, a woman who could be trusted to protect her lineage and the future of the empire. When Selim became Sultan, Nurbanu became the Haseki Sultan, or chief consort, and their children, including the future Sultan Murad III, were the heirs to the throne. The most important transition came when her son, Murad, ascended the throne. At this point, Nurbanu, now the Valid Sultan, the mother of the reigning monarch, came into her own. Unlike her predecessors, she didn't just advise from the sidelines, she ruled. Her son, Selim II, was known as Selim the Sot, and was more interested in wine and women than in governing. She had been his de facto regent and confidant for years, and now she was stepping into the full light of day. She was a savvy, experienced politician, and she knew how to navigate the complex world of the Ottoman state. She had a network of spies and informants, and she controlled the flow of information to her son, much like Hürrem and Mihrama had done before her. But she took it a step further. She became the official regent, making policy decisions, appointing officials, and even dictating foreign policy. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this time is Nurbanu's personal correspondence with Catherine de' Medici, the powerful Queen Mother of France. They exchanged gifts and letters, and their letters, written in Italian, are still preserved. This was not just a diplomatic nicety. It was a form of Guinnesseum diplomacy, a female-to-female channel of communication that bypassed the official male channels. Through this correspondence, Nurbanu was able to secure a Franco-Ottoman alliance against Spain, a move that had a huge impact on the balance of power in Europe and the Mediterranean. It's a fascinating glimpse into a world where women, from behind the scenes, were shaping the destinies of empires. This raises an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Nurbanu's ascent to power was a natural evolution of the Valide Sultan's role, or a direct consequence of her son's weakness. Did she seize power because she was a brilliant political mind, or was it simply thrust upon her because the Sultan was uninterested in ruling? The truth is probably a bit of both. Her intelligence and ambition were undeniable, but the circumstances of her son's reign created the perfect opportunity for her to step into the void and take control. Nurbanu's story is also one of immense wealth and patronage. She amassed a fortune that rivaled that of the most powerful pashas in the empire. She used this wealth to fund ambitious architectural projects, much like Hürrem and Mihrama before her. Her most famous work is the Atik Valide Mosque and its complex, which included a dervish lodge, a school, a hospital, and a public bathhouse. This wasn't just a symbol of her power, it was a way of connecting with the people, of building a public reputation as a benevolent and charitable leader. The Atik Valide Mosque was the first imperial mosque complex to be built in Istanbul by a woman, and its sheer size and grandeur were a statement. It was Nurbanu saying, "I am here, and my power is real. You can feel the weight of her presence, a woman who had a foot in two worlds, the sophisticated mercantile world of Renaissance Venice and the powerful patriarchal world of the Ottoman Empire. She was a master of both, a bridge between two cultures. She was a mother, a queen, and a regent, a woman who proved that a queen could be born of a captive, and that the most powerful ruler could be found not on the throne but in the harem. As her son, Murad III, became sultan, Nurbanu's political influence only grew. She would be a constant presence, a steady hand on the tiller of the empire, a woman who had seen it all and knew how to survive. As you watch her, the scent of the sea and the spices mingle, a symbol of the world she came from and the world she now ruled. She was the first Valide Sultan to truly live up to the title, and her legacy would be felt for generations to come. The air in the palace is growing colder, the scent of spices now mixed with the sharp metallic tang of ink and the subtle, dusty smell of old books. Nurbanu Sultan's reign has set a new standard for female power, and now you're watching her legacy unfold in a more complex, globally connected world. A new woman steps onto the stage, and she too is a product of her time, a woman whose story is inextricably linked to the intricate web of European politics and trade. She was a Venetian noblewoman, like Nurbanu, and her story is a testament to the enduring power of diplomacy, and the strange, unexpected alliances that can be forged across cultural and religious divides. You're about to meet Safiye Sultan, a woman who not only ruled the empire from the harem, but who also corresponded with one of the most powerful women in European history, Queen Elizabeth I of England. Safiye's story is a fascinating blend of intrigue, ambition, and international relations. She was also captured as a young girl and brought to the harem, where she eventually became the chief consort to Sultan Murad III, Nurbanu's son. But unlike Nurbanu, Safiye had to contend with a new kind of rival. The harem was now a battleground of political factions and personal rivalries, and Safiye had to be smarter, more ruthless, and more connected than her predecessors. She watched as Nurbanu, her mother-in-law, ruled the empire with a firm hand, and she learned from the best. She saw how Nurbanu used her political connections and her immense wealth to build her own power base, and she decided to do the same. A mainstream historical fact is that Safiye's influence was cemented during the reign of her son, Mehmed III. When he ascended to the throne, she became the Valide Sultan, and her power became absolute. She was a seasoned politician, and she knew how to play the long game. She had a network of spies and informants, and she was the ultimate gatekeeper, controlling who had access to her son and what information reached him. But her power wasn't just limited to the internal politics of the empire. She was a master of diplomacy, and she understood the importance of forging international alliances. This leads to an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Safiye was a pro-English, anti-Venetian figure, or if she was a pragmatic power broker who simply used her foreign connections to secure her own position. Did she have a genuine fondness for England? Or was she simply using Queen Elizabeth I as a counterweight to Venice and Spain, her traditional enemies? It's a complex question, and the truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle. She was a woman of the world, and she understood that in the game of empires, you had to be willing to make alliances with your enemy's enemies. And this is where the story gets really interesting. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the fascinating correspondence between Safiye Sultan and Queen Elizabeth I. In the late 16th century, England was isolated and in need of allies. Queen Elizabeth I, a master of diplomacy herself, saw an opportunity to forge a relationship with the Ottoman Empire, a major naval power and a rival to Spain. She wrote a letter to Safiye, addressing her as my sister, and sent her a series of lavish gifts, including a luxurious carriage and a royal portrait. Safiye, for her part, was happy to play along. She saw the alliance as a way to secure her own position and to gain an edge over her rivals. They exchanged letters and gifts, and their correspondence, though politically motivated, was also a fascinating glimpse into the world of two of the most powerful women of their time. They were both queens in their own right, and they understood the unique challenges and opportunities that came with their positions. Safiye's influence extended beyond diplomacy. She was also a patron of the arts and a philanthropist. She used her vast wealth to build the Yeni Valide Mosque, a magnificent complex that included a public bathhouse, a school, and a public fountain. This wasn't just a vanity project. It was a way of building her own power base, of earning the love and respect of the people. But her ambitious projects were not without controversy. The construction of the Yeni Valide Mosque was opposed by the Janissaries, who saw it as a symbol of female overreach. They staged riots and protests, and for a time the project was stalled. But Safiye was a woman of immense will, and she eventually prevailed. The mosque was completed, a testament to her power and her determination. You're now standing in a vast, sun-drenched courtyard, the sound of water trickling from a nearby fountain. The air is warm and still, and you can almost feel the weight of a history hanging in the air. Safiye Sultan is a formidable figure, a woman who ruled an empire from behind the scenes, and who corresponded with a queen on the other side of the world. She was a master of diplomacy, a patron of the arts, and a shrewd politician. But her power was not without its limits. As her son, Mehmed III, grew older, she had to contend with the growing influence of the Grand Vizier and the increasingly powerful Janissaries. She was a queen without a crown, a monarch without a throne, and she knew that her power was always a precarious balancing act. She was a woman of her time, a product of the Sultanate of women, but she was also a woman who pushed the boundaries of what was possible, and who left an indelible mark on the history of the Ottoman Empire. The air in the palace is heavy with the scent of old wood and hushed secrets. You can feel the weight of history pressing in on you, the whispers of the past echoing in the empty halls. Safiye Sultan's reign has ended, and her son, Mehmed III, has passed away. The empire is now in a state of flux, and a new woman is about to seize the reins of power, a woman who would become one of the most powerful figures in all of Ottoman history. Her story is one of ambition, tragedy, and survival, a testament to the incredible resilience of a woman in a world of men. You're about to meet Kösem Sultan, a woman who ruled the empire for nearly 4 decades, serving as regent for 2 of her grandsons, a figure so dominant that she was known simply as the Valid Sultan for an entire generation. Her story, much like Hürrem and Nurbanu before her, begins with her capture and enslavement. She was born Anastasia, a Greek girl from the island of Tinos, and she was brought to the harem as a young girl. She was beautiful, intelligent, and possessed a quiet determination that set her apart. She caught the eye of Sultan Ahmed I, and she quickly rose through the ranks to become his favourite consort. She was given the name Kösem, which means leader of the flock, a testament to her commanding presence and her sharp mind. But her path to power was not a simple one. She had to contend with the other women in the harem, and with the immense pressure of raising a family in a system where only one of her sons could ever hope to inherit the throne. The mainstream historical fact about Kösem is that she came to power not just as a mother, but as a regent. Her eldest son, Murad IV, was only 11 years old when he ascended to the throne, and the empire was in a state of chaos. The Janissaries, the elite soldiers of the empire, were running rampant, and the government was a mess. Kösem, as the Valide Sultan, stepped in and became the official regent, ruling the empire in her son's name. But her power was not just a formality. She was the one making the decisions, appointing officials, and dictating foreign policy. She was, for all intents and purposes, the true ruler of the empire. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that Kösem was known for her incredible generosity and her love for the people. She was a prolific patron of public works, funding the construction of mosques, schools, and fountains. She was also a great benefactor of the poor, paying off the debts of people who were in danger of being imprisoned for debt, and providing food and shelter for the homeless. She was so popular with the common people that they referred to her as the Mother of the Nation, a testament to her incredible charisma and her genuine care for the welfare of her subjects. It's a reminder that even in this world of ruthless political intrigue, there was still a human element, a woman who cared about the people she ruled. Kösem's reign was a time of both stability and immense turmoil. She was a brilliant politician, but she was also a ruthless one. She had to be. She had to contend with the Janissaries, who were a constant threat to her power, and with the rival factions in the court. She navigated these treacherous waters with an incredible level of skill, playing her enemies off against each other and forging alliances with her allies. She was a master of the political game, and she knew how to survive in a world where a single misstep could lead to your downfall. This leads to an open, scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Kösem was a benevolent ruler who saved the empire from collapse, or a ruthless tyrant who was willing to do whatever it took to maintain her power. Did she act out of a genuine desire to protect the empire and her family? Or was she simply a power-hungry opportunist who used her position to enrich herself and her allies? The truth is Like with all of these women, probably a bit of both. She was a product of her time, a woman who learned to play a dangerous game and play it well. She was a ruler, not a saint, and she made a lot of enemies along the way. Ghosem's story is also one of immense tragedy. She was a mother who saw two of her sons, Murad IV and Ibrahim, become sultans, but she also had to watch as her power was challenged and eventually usurped by the next generation of women. She eventually found herself in a power struggle with her daughter-in-law, Turan Sultan, a rivalry that would ultimately lead to her downfall. It's a cruel irony that the woman who had built a dynasty would eventually be undone by another woman, a reminder that the game of power is a never-ending one. You're now sitting in a plush divan, the scent of expensive incense hanging in the air. The room is quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of your silk clothes. You're contemplating this woman, Kusum. She was a captive who became a queen, a ruler who reigned for nearly 4 decades. She was a mother, a queen, and a regent. A woman who proved that a woman could be as formidable as any sultan, and that the greatest empires are often built not with swords, but with a sharp mind and an even sharper will. She was the ultimate power broker, a woman who bent the rules and broke the traditions, a woman who, for a time, was the true ruler of the Ottoman Empire. Her legacy would be felt for generations to come, a blueprint for a new kind of power. As you watch the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky, you can't help but wonder what her next move will be. You're still here, drifting in the quiet, dusty corridors of the Topkapi Palace, but the mood has shifted. The air is no longer heavy with the scent of perfume and power. It's thick with the metallic smell of fear and the acrid tang of gunpowder. The era of the all-powerful Valid Sultan, the Mother Queen, has been established. But now you're about to witness the tumultuous period that made their power both necessary and incredibly dangerous. This is the chaos of the early 17th century, a time of weak sultans, palace coups, and the rise of the Janissaries as a political force. It's the period that cemented the need for a strong female hand at the tiller of the empire, but also the period that showed just how precarious that power was. The mainstream historical fact about this era is that the Ottoman succession system, which had always been brutal, was now broken. Remember the fratricide rule? The execution of all a new sultan's brothers? It was a terrible system, but it did ensure that the new sultan had no rivals and could rule with absolute authority. But in the early 17th century that tradition was abandoned. The new rule was seniority, meaning the eldest male relative, not the eldest son, would inherit the throne. This was meant to be more humane, but it had a disastrous effect on the empire. It meant that the throne was now occupied by a series of weak, inexperienced and often mentally unstable sultans who had spent their lives locked away in a gilded cage called the cage, kefes. The cage was a part of the harem where princes were kept in isolation, forbidden to have children, and often denied any educational contact with the outside world. Can you imagine growing up your entire life knowing you could be executed at any moment, and then suddenly being thrust into power with no experience? It's like asking a goldfish to fly a fighter jet. This system produced a series of profoundly unprepared rulers, and a power vacuum was created. A power vacuum that the women of the harem were more than happy to fill. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this time is the curious case of the Prince-Maker sisters. During this period, the Sultan's sisters and daughters became incredibly powerful. They were married off to high-ranking pashas and viziers, and they acted as a crucial link between the harem and the outside world. These women, like Kösem Sultan's own daughters, would often be the ones who brokered peace treaties, appointed officials, and even arranged the succession. They were the ultimate political fixers, and they were the ones who truly held the empire together during this time of chaos. It's a reminder that the Sultanate of women wasn't just about the Valid Sultan, it was a sprawling network of female power. This leads to an open, scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the transition to seniority succession was a sign of the empire's humanitarian evolution, or a fatal flaw that ultimately led to its decline. Was it a well-intentioned but disastrous policy, or was it a sign that the Ottoman dynasty was already in decline, and this was just a symptom of a larger problem? It's a complex question, and the answer is probably a bit of both. The old system was brutal, but the new one was destabilizing, and the empire suffered as a result. The greatest beneficiaries of this chaos were the Janissaries, the elite infantry units of the Ottoman army. They were originally a loyal, highly disciplined fighting force. But as the sultans grew weaker, the Janissaries became a political force in their own right. They would storm the palace, demand bribes, and even depose and execute sultans who displeased them. They were a constant threat, and a good Valid sultan had to know how to manage them. They had to be appeased with money and favours, but they also had to be kept in check. It was a constant balancing act, and a single mistake could lead to your downfall. You're walking through a long, polished hallway now, the sound of your footsteps echoing in the silence. You can feel the tension in the air, the sense of a world on the brink. You know that at any moment the Janissaries could storm the palace, and all the political manoeuvring and backstabbing would come to an end. This is the world that Kösem Sultan had to navigate. She was a master of this game, but even she was not immune to its dangers. She had to use her intelligence, her charisma, and her immense wealth to keep the Janissaries at bay. But she knew that her power was always a precarious thing. This era of chaos and instability, this period of weak sultans and powerful women, is the crucible in which the Sultanate of women was truly forged. It was a time when the harem was not just a place of quiet seclusion, it was the centre of power, the heart of the empire. The women of the harem were not just surviving, they were thriving. They were the ones who held the empire together during its darkest hours, and their stories are a testament to their incredible resilience, intelligence, and ambition. But this period of female dominance couldn't last forever. A new force was about to emerge, a new woman who would challenge Kösem's power and eventually bring the Sultanate of women to an end. The stage is set for a final epic clash between two of the most powerful women in Ottoman history, a battle that would decide the fate of an empire. The air in the palace is electric now, humming with a tension you can almost taste. The whispers in the harem have grown louder, more desperate, as two of the most formidable women in Ottoman history find themselves on a collision course. The era of chaos has created a power vacuum, and now two queens are vying to fill it. On one side, you have the seasoned veteran, the Queen Mother, the woman who has ruled the empire for decades, Kösem Sultan. On the other, a new younger rival, a woman with her own ambitions and a fierce determination to secure her own legacy, Turhan Sultan. This isn't just a rivalry, it's an epic clash of dynasties, a battle for the very soul of the empire. You're standing in the middle of a swirling maelstrom of intrigue. Kösem is a figure of immense authority, a woman who has survived the reigns of 4 different sultans. She is the mother of 2 sultans and the grandmother of a 3rd. She knows every secret, every weakness, and every dark corner of the palace. She's a master of the political game, and she has a network of allies and informants that stretches across the empire. She's an empire builder, a woman who has kept the Ottoman state from collapsing under the weight of its own internal strife. But she's also aging, and her power is beginning to wane. The younger generation is coming for her, and she knows it. Turhan Sultan, by contrast, is a new force. She was a captive from Russia, a slave girl who, like Hürrem and Nurbanu before her, rose through the ranks to become the chief consort of Sultan Ibrahim. She gave birth to the future Sultan Mehmed IV, and now she is the mother of the reigning monarch. But her son is only 6 years old, and she is young and inexperienced. She knows she needs to learn fast, or she will be swallowed whole by the political sharks that surround her, and the biggest shark of all is her mother-in-law Kösem. The mainstream historical fact about this period is that Turhan challenged Kösem's power directly. Kösem, still the reigning Valide Sultan, was not ready to give up her authority. She saw Turhan as an inexperienced young girl, a threat to her own power and the stability of the empire. Turhan, for her part, saw Kösem as a power-hungry matriarch who was unwilling to let go of her control. The tension between them was palpable, and the harem became a battleground of whispers, rumours, and subtle sabotage. The stakes were nothing less than the future of the Ottoman Empire. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the role of the chief black eunuch, the Kizlar Aga. In this power struggle, the Kizlar Aga, a eunuch named Suleiman, became a crucial player. He was a close confidant of Turhan, and he became her eyes and ears in the harem. He fed her information, helped her forge alliances, and advised her on how to outmaneuver her formidable mother-in-law. The Kizlar Aga was, in effect, a spy and a political advisor, a reminder that the world of the harem was not just a world of women, but a complex web of power and influence that included men who were also outsiders. This leads to an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the rivalry between Kösem and Turan was primarily a personal feud or a clash of political ideologies. Was it a simple battle of wills between two ambitious women, or was it a struggle between two different visions for the future of the empire? Kösem was a pragmatist, a woman who was willing to do whatever it took to keep the empire from collapsing. She was known for her ruthlessness and her willingness to compromise. Turan, on the other hand, was a younger, more idealistic figure. She was a woman who was determined to restore the power of the Sultan and to bring an end to the era of female dominance. The truth is probably a bit of both. Their personal rivalry was a reflection of a larger political struggle, a clash between the old guard and the new. The rivalry came to a head in a dramatic palace coup. Kösem, seeing her power slipping away, decided to take a drastic step. She plotted to depose her grandson, Mehmed IV, and replace him with another prince, a younger boy who she hoped would be more pliable. The plot was discovered, and Turhan, with the help of the Kislar Aga and her loyal supporters, moved against Kösem. The details are fuzzy, but what is clear is that on the night of September 2nd, 1651, Kösem was strangled to death in her own bedchamber. It was a shocking and brutal end for a woman who had ruled the empire for nearly 40 years. The most powerful woman in Ottoman history had been undone by her own daughter-in-law. You're now standing in a quiet corner of the palace, the scent of death and betrayal hanging in the air. The rivalry between Kösem and Turhan was a defining moment in the history of the Sultanate of Women. It was the final, bloody chapter in an era of female dominance. Turhan, having emerged victorious, would now take her place as the new Valid Sultan, and she would have to deal with the legacy of her mother-in-law. She would have to navigate the chaos of the empire, the power of the Janissaries, and the expectations of a people who had grown used to being ruled by a powerful woman. But she would do it on her own terms, a testament to her own strength and determination. The old guard was gone, and a new era of female power was about to begin. The empire was hers to command, and she would prove herself to be a worthy successor to the women who had come before her. The air in the palace is quiet now, the lingering scent of betrayal and fear slowly being replaced by the determined aroma of new authority. The bloody rivalry between Kösem and Turhan has reached its violent conclusion. A new era has begun, and a new woman, younger and more resolute, stands at the centre of power. You're about to witness the reign of Turan Sultan, a woman who, having defeated her formidable mother-in-law, now had to prove she was worthy of the mantle she had seized. This is the story of how a young, inexperienced woman consolidated her power, stabilised a collapsing empire, and became one of the most effective and respected Valid sultans in Ottoman history. Turan's reign didn't begin with the celebration. It began with a crisis. The murder of Kösem had plunged the palace into a state of shock and uncertainty. The Janissaries were a constant threat, the treasury was empty, and the empire was reeling from years of instability. Her son, Sultan Mehmed IV, was still a child, and the responsibility of ruling fell squarely on her shoulders. She was, for all intents and purposes, the sole ruler of the Ottoman Empire. She had won the battle, but now she had to win the war for the empire's survival. The mainstream historical fact here is that Turan Sultan became the last great Valide Sultan of the Sultanate of Women. She learned from the mistakes of her predecessors and the brutal lessons of her own rise to power. She didn't just rule from behind the scenes, she actively engaged with the bureaucracy, the military and the public. She appointed capable and loyal Grand Viziers, the most notable of whom was Koprulu Mehmed Pasha, a brilliant but ruthless politician who helped her restore order and stability. Together they formed a formidable team, a partnership that would bring the empire back from the brink of collapse. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that Turhan was a fervent supporter of the ulama, the religious scholars of the empire. She believed that a strong moral and religious foundation was essential for a stable society, and she used her immense wealth and influence to support religious institutions and scholars. She funded the construction of mosques and schools, and she commissioned religious texts and translations. This was a clever political move, as it helped her to gain the support of a powerful and influential group. But it was also a reflection of her own personal piety. She was a woman who believed that a strong empire was built not just on military might, but on faith and morality. This leads to an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Turan's decision to hand over significant power to the Köprülü family was an act of weakness or a brilliant strategic move. Did she cede power because she was overwhelmed by the challenges of ruling, or did she deliberately create a powerful vizierial dynasty to bring order to a chaotic empire and protect her son's reign. The truth is, it was likely a bit of both. She was a pragmatist, a woman who knew her own limitations and the strengths of others. She knew that to save the empire she had to be willing to share power, and in doing so she became one of the most effective rulers in Ottoman history. She was a woman who understood that sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to delegate. Turhan's legacy is a testament to her incredible vision and her unwavering determination. She not only restored order to the empire, but she also commissioned some of the most magnificent architectural projects of her time. The most famous of these is the Yeni Valide Mosque, which she finally completed after it had been left unfinished for decades. It was a massive undertaking, and its completion was a symbol of the empire's renewed strength and stability. The mosque, along with its complex of public baths, schools and hospitals, was a testament to her charity and her love for the people. She was a builder, a patron, and a leader, a woman who left an indelible mark on the landscape of Istanbul. You're now standing in a vast, sun-drenched courtyard, the sound of water trickling from a nearby fountain. The air is warm and still, and you can almost feel the weight of history hanging in the air. Turhan Sultan is a formidable figure, a woman who ruled an empire from behind the scenes and who restored order and stability to a collapsing state. She was a master of diplomacy, a patron of the arts, and a shrewd politician. But her power was not without its limits. As her son, Mehmed IV, grew older, she had to contend with the growing influence of the Grand Vizier and the increasingly powerful Janissaries. She was a queen without a crown, a monarch without a throne, and she knew that her power was always a precarious balancing act. She was a woman of her time, a product of the Sultanate of women, but she was also a woman who pushed the boundaries of what was possible, and who left an indelible mark on the history of the Ottoman Empire. Her legacy would be felt for generations to come, a blueprint for a new kind of power. As you watch her walk away, you can't help but feel a sense of anticipation for what comes next. The stage has been set and the end of the Sultanate of women is on the horizon. The air in the palace has finally grown quiet. The grand drama of Kösem and Turhan has ended, and with it, the high water mark of the Sultanate of women. Turhan Sultan, having secured her son's throne, now finds herself in a new world. The chaos of the past century has finally subsided, and a new generation of male leaders is rising to power, men who will no longer tolerate the kind of female influence that dominated the court for so long. You're about to witness the end of the Sultanate of women, a slow, steady decline that saw the women of the harem return to their traditional roles, their political power curtailed, and their influence relegated to the shadows. The mainstream historical fact here is that the official end of the Sultanate of women is largely marked by the rise of the Köprülü family. Turhan, as a pragmatist, had appointed Köprülü Mehmed Pasha as Grand Vizier, and in doing so she unwittingly set in motion the forces that would lead to the end of her own era. The Köprülü family was a dynasty of incredibly capable and powerful Grand Viziers who, for over a century, would effectively rule the empire. They were strong, independent figures who were unwilling to be dictated to by the women of the harem. They brought a new level of stability and military success to the empire, and in doing so they rendered the political manoeuvring of the valid sultans unnecessary. The empire no longer needed a powerful female regent to hold it together. It had a powerful male vizierial family to do that. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the women of the harem, even in this period of decline, still found ways to exert their influence. They would often act as a crucial link between the sultan and the Köprülü viziers, acting as intermediaries and go-betweens. They would also continue to use their wealth and patronage to fund public works and charities, a way of maintaining their public reputation and their influence, even if their direct political power was gone. For example, even after Turan's death, other women of the royal family continued to build mosques and public fountains, a quiet but persistent reminder of their enduring presence. It's a bit like a retired CEO still showing up at board meetings just to make sure they're still invited to the company picnic. This leads to an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the end of the Sultanate of women was a sign of the empire's recovery or a tragic loss of female political power. Was it a positive development, a return to a more traditional and effective form of male-dominated rule, or was it a step backward, a move that silenced the voices of some of the most capable and intelligent politicians of the era? The truth is, it was probably a bit of both. The Köprülü family did bring stability and a new level of military success to the empire, but they also ushered in an era where the women of the harem were no longer seen as political partners, but as a potential source of instability. The decline of the Sultanate of Women was a slow, subtle process, not a sudden revolution. It began with Turhan herself, who by empowering the Köprülü family effectively signed the death warrant of her own era. Her successors, the later Valide sultans, would still hold power and influence, but it would be on a much smaller scale. They would no longer be the de facto rulers of the empire. They would be advisors, confidants, and patrons, but they would no longer be the ones making the final decisions. The power had shifted. The centre of gravity had moved from the harem to the Grand Vizier's palace. You're walking through a long, polished hallway now, the sound of your footsteps echoing in the silence. The once vibrant world of the harem feels a little emptier, a little quieter. The whispers are softer now, the political manoeuvring more subtle. The women you see are still powerful, but their power is different. It's a power of influence, not of authority. It's the power of a queen mother, not a regent. It's a quieter, more subdued power, a power that works behind the scenes, not in the full light of day. This is the final chapter of the Sultanate of Women. The era of Hürrem, Nurbanu, Kösem and Turhan has come to an end, but their legacy lives on. Their stories are a testament to the incredible resilience, intelligence and ambition of a group of women who, against all odds, rose to power in a world of men. They were a brief, dazzling, and ultimately fleeting moment in history, a window into a world where a woman's word could move mountains, even if she couldn't be seen or heard by the common people. As you walk out of the palace, the scent of jasmine and spices is gone, replaced by the scent of a new era. The grand drama is over, but the quiet, persistent presence of these women still lingers in the air. The Sultanate of Women has ended, but their stories will be told forever. The grand dramas have faded, and the empire is now in the hands of men. But the walls still hold their secrets, and you're about to step into the very heart of the world where those secrets were born. You're no longer watching from a distance. You're walking through the quiet, intricate pathways of the harem itself, a world within a world, a place of immense power and stifling seclusion. This isn't a single room, a simple boudoir of a sultan's favourite. It is a vast, complex ecosystem, a meticulously organised society with its own hierarchy, its own rules, and its own unique culture. Understanding the physical and social organisation of the imperial harem is key to understanding how the women we've talked about, Hürrem, Nurbanu, Kösem, were able to wield such astonishing power. The mainstream historical fact about the harem is that its primary function was to house the sultan's female relatives and concubines, but it was also a political and administrative centre. It was a well-oiled machine, run with the precision of a Swiss watch, a fact that would surprise many who picture it as a chaotic, sensual free-for-all. At the top of this pyramid was the Valide Sultan, the mother of the reigning monarch, who was the absolute authority within the harem's walls. Below her were the other high-ranking women, the Haseki Sultan or chief consort, and the Sultan's daughters and sisters. These women were not just passive residents. They were patrons, administrators, and political figures in their own right, each with their own suite of rooms, their own servants, and their own immense wealth. Below them were the concubines, or carrier, who were not considered slaves in the traditional sense, as they were often educated and given specific roles. They could be singers, dancers, or skilled artisans. The girls who were chosen to potentially catch the Sultan's eye were called Gözde, or the favourite, and if they gave birth to a child, they became Iqbal, or the fortunate. The ultimate goal for any concubine was to become the mother of a future sultan, which would elevate her to the status of Valide Sultan and give her immense power. The rest of the women were a vast network of servants, cooks, laundresses, and a host of other functionaries, all under the strict command of the harem supervisor, the Kizlar Aga. This brings us to a quirky or fringe tidbit about the Kizlar Aga, the chief black eunuch. This position, often held by an African man who was castrated and brought to the palace, was one of the most powerful in the entire empire. He was the head of the harem's administration, responsible for its security and its finances. But his power went far beyond that. He was the gatekeeper of the harem, controlling who went in and out, and he was the primary channel of communication between the sultan and the women of the harem. He often became a close confidant and political advisor to the Valide Sultan, and his influence was a crucial part of the Sultanate of Women. It was a strange and unique position, a man who, because of his physical condition, was able to operate in a female-dominated world and wield incredible power. You're walking through a long, polished hallway now, the sound of your footsteps echoing in the silence. The walls are tiled in exquisite mosaics, and the air is thick with the scent of incense and rosewater. You see the various courtyards of the harem, each one a different social stratum. There's the courtyard of the concubines, a place of music and laughter, and the courtyard of the Valid Sultan, a place of quiet authority and solemnity. You can feel the weight of the social hierarchy, the unspoken rules that governed every interaction, every glance, every word. This intricate social structure leads to an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the harem was a place of oppression or a unique kind of female-run society. Was it a prison, a gilded cage where women were held captive and used as political pawns? Or was it a world where women, though secluded from the outside world, were able to build their own social networks, wield immense political power, and live a life of luxury and comfort? The truth is, it was probably a bit of both. For a woman who was a captive from a foreign land, it was a place of confinement. But for a woman who was able to rise through the ranks, it was a place of incredible opportunity, a world where she could become a queen without a crown. The education of the women in the harem was a key part of this unique society. They were not just taught music and poetry, they were taught to read and write, to manage finances, and to understand the intricacies of court politics. They were, in effect, trained to be queens. They were taught to be shrewd, to be ambitious, and to be resilient. This education was a crucial part of the Sultanate of Women, as it gave these women the tools they needed to survive and thrive in a world that was often hostile to them. They were not just beautiful faces, they were educated and intelligent power brokers, and their education was the secret weapon that allowed them to succeed. As you walk through the last corridor of the harem, you can almost hear the whispers of the past, the echoes of 1,000 years of intrigue, ambition, and female power. The harem was a world of its own, a place where a woman could be a slave one day and a queen the next. It was a place of confinement, but also a place of incredible opportunity. It was the heart of the Sultanate of Women, the very crucible in which these powerful women were forged. You now have a better understanding of the stage on which they played their parts, and you're ready to explore the specific ways in which they wielded their influence, from their immense financial power to their grand architectural projects. You're still in the labyrinthine corridors of the harem, but you've moved from the residential quarters to the administrative wing. The air here smells of ink and aged paper, and the hushed whispers are no longer of rivalries and love affairs, but of ledgers, land deeds, and gold. You're about to discover a fact that would have sent a shockwave through any traditional European court. The women of the Ottoman harem, far from being financially dependent, wielded immense financial power. This wasn't just pocket money. It was a vast, sprawling economic empire that rivaled that of the most powerful pashas and viziers. The mainstream historical fact here is that the women of the imperial harem, particularly the Valide sultans, controlled vast personal fortunes. This wealth came from several sources. First, they received a regular stipend from the state treasury, which for a Valid sultan could be an enormous sum. Second, they were given the revenues from vast land holdings, or has, which were specifically allocated to them. These lands could span entire provinces, and the women of the harem would collect the taxes and rents from these areas. Third, they received lavish gifts from foreign dignitaries and Ottoman officials who sought their favour. These gifts were not just baubles. They were often massive sums of money, jewels, and luxury goods. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the role of the harem's own internal banking system. The women of the harem often lent money to the state and to private individuals, and they charged interest, just like any other bank. They were also savvy investors, and they would invest their money in trade and commercial ventures. This was all managed by the Kislar Aga and a team of trusted servants, who acted as their financial advisors and agents. It's a bit like a modern-day hedge fund, but with more silk and fewer PowerPoint presentations. The women of the harem were not just passive recipients of wealth, they were active participants in the Ottoman economy, and they used their wealth to fund their political ambitions and their grand public works. This brings us to an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the financial power of the Valid sultans was a sign of the empire's economic health or a symptom of its decline. Was their ability to control so much wealth a sign of a vibrant, thriving economy? Or was it a sign that the state was so weak and disorganized that a private individual, even a woman, could amass so much power? The truth is, it was probably a bit of both. The Ottoman economy was incredibly complex and sophisticated, but the political chaos of the 17th century did allow for a concentration of power in the hands of a few, and the women of the harem were in a perfect position to take advantage of that. The financial power of these women was not just a means to a comfortable life, it was a tool of political control. They used their wealth to reward their allies, to punish their enemies, and to fund their political campaigns. For example, they would often use their money to pay the salaries of the janissaries, the elite soldiers of the empire, who were a constant threat to their power. By paying the janissaries, they were able to keep them loyal and prevent them from staging a coup. They also used their wealth to build a network of loyal officials and informants, a kind of private intelligence agency that kept them informed about the political climate of the empire. You're now walking through a vast cavernous room, the ceiling soaring far above you. This is the imperial treasury, and the scent of gold and silver hangs heavy in the air. You can almost feel the weight of the immense wealth that passed through the hands of these women. You see the ledgers and the land deeds, the jewels and the gold coins, all a testament to their incredible financial power. You realise that the Sultanate of Women was not just a political phenomenon, it was an economic one. It was a time when the women of the harem were not just queens, but also financiers, investors, and philanthropists. Their financial power was the engine that drove their grand architectural projects, which we will explore in more detail later. They used their wealth to build mosques, schools, hospitals, and public fountains, a way of building their own power base and winning the love and respect of the people. They were not just passive figures waiting for a sultan's attention. They were active participants in the economic and political life of the empire. They were the ultimate power brokers, and their wealth was the secret weapon that allowed them to succeed. As you walk out of the treasury, the air outside feels a little cleaner, a little fresher. The grand drama of the Sultanate of Women has ended, but the quiet, persistent presence of these women still lingers in the air. The Sultanate of Women has ended, but their stories will be told forever. The women of the harem were not just beautiful faces, they were educated and intelligent power brokers, and their financial power was the secret weapon that allowed them to succeed. They were a brief, dazzling and ultimately fleeting moment in history, a window into a world where a woman's word could move mountains, even if she couldn't be seen or heard by the common people. The Sultanate of Women has ended, but their stories will be told forever. You're out of the dusty administrative wing and into the glorious light of the Ottoman capital, but you're not in a marketplace or a military parade. Instead, you find yourself standing before a magnificent complex of buildings, a mosque, a school, a hospital, and a public bathhouse, all built with an astonishing blend of power and piety. You're about to explore one of the most visible and enduring legacies of the powerful women of the Ottoman Empire, their role as grand patrons of architecture and public works. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a profound political statement, a way for these women to engrave their names and their influence into the very landscape of the empire. The mainstream historical fact here is that the valid sultans and other high-ranking royal women were responsible for some of the most beautiful and ambitious architectural projects in Ottoman history. The most famous example is the Yeni Valide Mosque, a magnificent complex that stands today at the Eminönü waterfront in Istanbul. Its construction was started by Safiye Sultan, but, due to political upheaval, was eventually completed by Turhan Sultan. For a century, its unfinished walls stood as a symbol of the empire's instability, but its completion by Turhan was a powerful statement of her ability to restore order and stability. It was her personal monument, a physical representation of her triumph over chaos. It's a bit like a modern-day CEO building a new headquarters to show the company is back on track. These architectural projects were not just about mosques. They were often sprawling complexes, or kullis, that included a whole range of public services. The complexes built by these women often included schools, madrasas, hospitals, public kitchens, imarets, that fed the poor, and public fountains, sebil, that provided fresh drinking water. Hürrem Sultan, for example, built a complex in Jerusalem that included a public kitchen that fed the poor and a bathhouse. Her daughter, Mihrimah Sultan, commissioned the famous Mihrimah Sultan Mosque on the European side of Istanbul. Nurbanu Sultan, the Venetian Valide Sultan, built the Atik Valide Mosque and its complex, which included a dervish lodge. These projects were a testament to their immense wealth, but they were also a way of solidifying their power and winning the love and respect of the people. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the fascinating rivalry between the women's architects. Mimar Sinan, the chief architect for Suleiman the Magnificent, was a superstar of his time, a bit like a modern-day Frank Gehry. He built masterpieces for both Hurrem and Mihrimah, and the legend of his unrequited love for Mihrimah has been passed down for centuries. But the women of the harem also had their own architects, and they were often women. The most famous example is the legend of the female architect known as Huda, who was said to have worked for Kösem Sultan. While Huda's existence is debated, the fact that such a legend even exists is a testament to the influence of these women in the world of architecture and art. They were not just commissioning buildings, they were shaping the very aesthetics and urban planning of the empire. This leads to an open, scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these architectural projects were acts of genuine charity or calculated political moves. Were these women truly concerned with the welfare of the poor, or were they simply using their wealth to build a power base and ensure their legacy? The truth, as always, is probably a bit of both. In the Ottoman worldview, piety and political power were not mutually exclusive. An act of charity was also an act of power, a way of showing the people that you were a benevolent and capable leader. The women of the harem understood this better than anyone, and they used their wealth to build not just buildings, but also a reputation for piety and generosity. You're walking now through the vast, sun-drenched courtyard of the Yeni Valide Mosque, the sound of water trickling from a nearby fountain. The air is warm and still, and you can almost feel the weight of history hanging in the air. The dome soars above you, a perfect arc of stone and light. You realise that these buildings are not just silent monuments, they are living, breathing testaments to the power of these women. They're a reminder that the Sultanate of women was not just a political phenomenon, it was a cultural and artistic one as well. These women were not just patrons of architecture, they were also patrons of the arts. They would commission works of art, poetry and music, and they would often host lavish parties and cultural events in their palaces. They were the ultimate trendsetters, and their tastes and preferences influenced the art, fashion and social life of the Ottoman capital for generations. They were a bit like a modern-day Anna Wintour or Oprah Winfrey, but with more power and a lot more jewellery. They were the tastemakers of the empire, and their influence was everywhere. As you walk out of the courtyard, the air feels a little cooler, a little fresher. The grand drama of the Sultanate of women has ended, but the quiet, persistent presence of these women still lingers in the air. Their architectural legacy is a testament to their power, their piety and their ambition. They were a brief, dazzling and ultimately fleeting moment in history, a window into a world where a woman's word could move mountains, even if she couldn't be seen or heard by the common people. The Sultanate of women has ended, but their stories will be told forever. You're standing in a different part of the palace now, a section that feels more like a barracks than a royal residence. The air is no longer perfumed with rosewater and incense. It smells of sweat, leather, and steel. The hushed whispers have been replaced by the low, guttural murmur of thousands of men, their conversation punctuated by the sharp clang of metal. You are in the heart of the Janissary quarters, and you're about to explore the complex, often bloody relationship between these elite soldiers and the women of the court. The Janissaries and palace politics were inextricably linked, and for the powerful women of the harem, this formidable military force was both their greatest threat and their most powerful tool. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Janissaries, originally an elite corps of slave soldiers known for their loyalty and discipline, had, by the 17th century, become a powerful political force in their own right. They were no longer just soldiers, they were kingmakers. They could, and often did, depose sultans, execute grand viziers, and even dictate state policy. For the Valide sultans, the Janissaries were a constant looming threat. A misstep, a perceived slight, or a moment of weakness could trigger a revolt, and the women of the court would be the first to suffer. Kösem Sultan's murder, for example, was a direct consequence of a failed attempt to outmaneuver the Janissaries and their allies. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the women of the harem used to have a very special way of communicating with the Janissaries. They would often send gifts of food, particularly baklava, to the Janissary barracks. This wasn't just a gesture of goodwill, it was a political signal. If the Janissaries accepted the baklava, it was a sign that they were content and loyal. If they refused it, it was a clear sign that they were unhappy and on the verge of revolt. This tradition, known as the baklava procession, was a crucial part of the political landscape of the 17th century, a silent and delicious form of diplomacy. It's a bit like a modern-day CEO sending a fruit basket to a rival company to signal that they're not a threat. This brings us to an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the Janissaries' political power was a sign of the empire's internal rot or a natural check on the power of an absolute monarch. Were they a destabilising force that ultimately led to the empire's decline, or were they, in a strange and brutal way, a necessary evil, a way of holding the sultans and the women of the harem accountable for their actions? The truth is, it was probably a bit of both. The Janissaries' power was a symptom of a weak central government, but it was also a powerful force that, at times, kept the empire from collapsing completely. The women of the harem, in particular the Valid sultans, had to become masters of Janissary diplomacy. They used their immense wealth to appease the Janissaries, paying them massive bonuses, or kulas, upon the accession of a new sultan. They would also use their influence to appoint or depose officials who were popular or unpopular with the Janissaries. They were constantly walking a tightrope, trying to balance the needs of the empire with the demands of its most powerful military force. It was a dangerous game, and a single mistake could cost them their lives. You're walking now through the long, dusty halls of the Janissary barracks, the air thick with the smell of sweat and the sound of men's voices. You can feel the tension in the air, the sense of a world on the brink. You see the Janissaries, their faces hard and their eyes sharp. They're a formidable force, and you realise that for the women of the harem, these men were both their greatest allies and their most dangerous enemies. The Janissaries were the ultimate kingmakers, and a good Valida sultan had to know how to manage them. The most famous example of this is Turan Sultan. When she came to power, the Janissaries were a constant threat to her son's throne. She knew that to secure her power, she had to either destroy them or appease them. She chose a third path. She appointed a powerful Grand Vizier, Köprülü Mehmed Pasha, who was known for his ruthlessness and his ability to control the Janissaries. Together they purged the Janissary leadership, restored order, and brought the unruly soldiers back under the control of the state. It was a brutal but effective move, and it was a testament to Turhan's political savvy and her ability to play the long game. As you walk out of the barracks, the air outside feels a little cleaner, a little fresher. The grand drama of the Sultanate of Women has ended, but the quiet, persistent presence of these women still lingers in the air. The Janissaries were a constant threat, but they were also a crucial part of the political landscape. The women of the harem, through their diplomacy and their cunning, were able to navigate this treacherous world and, for a time, use it to their advantage. They were a brief, dazzling and ultimately fleeting moment in history, a window into a world where a woman's word could move mountains, even if she couldn't be seen or heard by the common people. The Sultanate of Women has ended, but their stories will be told forever. You're still in the palace, but you've moved to a different wing, one that feels both grand and precarious. The air here is no longer thick with the scent of intrigue, but of power, raw, unfiltered, and deeply male. You're in the grand audience chamber, where the Sultan and his Grand Vizier would receive foreign dignitaries. For the women of the harem, this man, the highest-ranking official in the empire after the Sultan himself, was either a crucial ally or a dangerous enemy. The shifting relationship between the women of the harem and the Grand Vizier was a constant source of tension, and a crucial part of the political landscape. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Grand Vizier was, in many ways, the de facto ruler of the empire. He commanded the army, presided over the imperial council, and was responsible for the day-to-day administration of the state. For the women of the harem, the Grand Vizier was the ultimate gatekeeper. He controlled who had access to the Sultan, and he was the one who could either implement their policies or ignore them entirely. The Valid sultans, therefore, had to be masters of vizierial diplomacy, a delicate dance of flattery, bribes, and threats. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the fascinating practice of gynecium diplomacy, a term used to describe the female-to-female communication between the women of the Ottoman court and their counterparts in Europe. This was often done through the Grand Vizier, who would act as a middleman, but the women of the harem also had their own channels of communication. They would send letters and gifts to their European counterparts, and in return they would receive information and support. It was a kind of parallel diplomacy, a secret world of female power that existed alongside the official male-dominated world of international relations. It's a bit like a modern-day backchannel, but with more silk and fewer encrypted messages. This brings us to an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the Grand Viziers of the Sultanate of Women were genuinely independent figures or mere puppets of the powerful women of the harem. Were they men of great ambition and skill who were simply doing their jobs, or were they pawns in a larger game of female power? The truth is, it was probably a bit of both. The Grand Viziers were often men of great talent, but they were also politically savvy enough to know that to survive they had to be on the right side of the Valid Sultan. A Grand Vizier who crossed a powerful Valid Sultan would often find himself a dead man. The women of the harem, therefore, had to be masters of the political game. They would use their immense wealth and influence to appoint or depose Grand Viziers who were either loyal to them or a threat to their power. The most famous example of this is the case of Kusum Sultan and her many Grand Viziers. She was known for her ability to manipulate and control the men around her, and she would often appoint Grand Viziers who were loyal to her and would do her bidding. But she also had to contend with Grand Viziers who were not so easily manipulated, and her relationship with them was often fraught with tension. You're walking now through the vast sun-drenched courtyard of the Grand Vizier's palace, the sound of water trickling from a nearby fountain. The air is warm and still, and you can almost feel the weight of history hanging in the air. The Grand Vizier is a formidable figure, a man of immense power and authority. But you also know that for all his power he's still a subject of the Sultan, and more importantly a subject of the Sultan's mother. The women of the harem were not just a passive force, they were a powerful and active part of the political landscape, and the Grand Vizier was just one of the many players they had to contend with. The most famous example of a successful partnership between a Grand Vizier and a Valid Sultan is the case of Turhan Sultan and the Köprülü family. Turhan, a shrewd pragmatist, knew that she could not rule the empire alone. She appointed Köprülü Mehmed Pasha as Grand Vizier, a man who was known for his ruthlessness and his ability to restore order. Together, they formed a formidable team, a partnership that would bring the empire back from the brink of collapse. This was a new kind of political relationship, a partnership between a powerful woman and a powerful man, a testament to Turhan's political savvy and her ability to play the long game. It was a final, brilliant chapter in the story of the Sultanate of Women, a moment where a powerful woman and a powerful man came together to save an empire. As you walk out of the Grand Vizier's palace, the air outside feels a little cleaner, a little fresher. The grand drama of the Sultanate of Women has ended, but the quiet, persistent presence of these women still lingers in the air. The Grand Vizier was a constant threat, but he was also a crucial part of the political landscape. The women of the harem, through their diplomacy and their cunning, were able to navigate this treacherous world and, for a time, use it to their advantage. They were a brief, dazzling and ultimately fleeting moment in history, a window into a world where a woman's word could move mountains, even if she couldn't be seen or heard by the common people. The Sultanate of Women has ended, but their stories will be told forever. You're no longer confined to the palace walls. You're on a ship, a galleon sailing across the shimmering Mediterranean, and the air smells of salt sea and distant lands. You're about to explore a side of the powerful women of the Ottoman Empire that few people ever consider, their role in foreign policy and diplomatic alliances. This wasn't just a matter of sending a few letters. It was a complex, sophisticated game of international relations, and these women were masters of it. They forged alliances, brokered treaties, and influenced the destinies of empires from behind the scenes, and their power extended far beyond the walls of the harem. The mainstream historical fact here is that the women of the Ottoman court, particularly the Valid sultans, had their own diplomatic channels and connections. While the Grand Vizier and the male officials handled the day-to-day diplomacy, these women often had private correspondences with foreign queens and ambassadors. The most famous example of this is the correspondence between Safiye Sultan and Queen Elizabeth I of England. They exchanged letters and gifts, and in doing so they created a parallel diplomatic channel that bypassed the official male-dominated world of international relations. This was a crucial alliance for both sides. England was a naval power that was a rival to Spain, the greatest enemy of the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottomans were a powerful land and sea empire that could be a valuable ally for England. Their correspondence was a way of solidifying this alliance, a quiet but persistent reminder that in the game of empires, you had to be willing to make alliances with your enemy's enemies. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the fascinating role of the Jewish women of the court, particularly a woman named Esther Handeli. She was a Jewish kira, a term for a woman who acted as an agent and a broker for the women of the harem. She was fluent in several languages, and she had a vast network of connections across Europe. She would often act as an intermediary between the women of the harem and foreign dignitaries, carrying letters and gifts and providing intelligence and information. She was, in effect, a kind of spy and a diplomat, a woman who operated in the shadows and who played a crucial role in the foreign policy of the empire. It's a bit like a modern-day intelligence agent, but with more silk and fewer exploding pens. The existence of these kiras is a testament to the fact that the women of the harem were not just isolated figures. They were connected to a vast network of spies, agents, and diplomats that stretched across the globe. This brings us to an open, scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the diplomatic activities of these women were a sign of their genuine political power or a symptom of the empire's decline. Did their ability to engage in foreign policy show that they were the true rulers of the empire? Or did it show that the male-dominated government was so weak and disorganised that it was necessary for the women of the harem to step in and take over? The truth is, it was probably a bit of both. The Ottoman government was often in a state of chaos, and the women of the harem were in a unique position to step in and fill the void. But their ability to do so also shows that they were intelligent, capable politicians who were able to navigate the treacherous waters of international relations with an incredible level of skill. The women of the harem were not just involved in diplomacy, they were also involved in trade. They would often use their immense wealth to invest in trade and commercial ventures, and they would often act as patrons of foreign merchants and traders. This was a way of not only enriching themselves, but also of building a network of foreign connections that they could use for political purposes. For example, they would often use their influence to grant special trade privileges to foreign merchants, a way of currying favour and building alliances. It was a kind of economic diplomacy, a way of using their wealth and influence to shape the course of international relations. You're standing now on the deck of a ship, the sun warm on your face and the wind in your hair. The grand drama of the Sultanate of Women has ended, but the quiet, persistent presence of these women still lingers in the air. Their role in foreign policy and diplomatic alliances is a testament to their power, their intelligence, and their ambition. They were a brief, dazzling, and ultimately fleeting moment in history, a window into a world where a woman's word could move mountains, even if she couldn't be seen or heard by the common people. The Sultanate of Women has ended, but their stories will be told forever. Their influence was not just limited to the palace walls, it extended across the globe, and their stories are a testament to the fact that power can be found in the most unexpected of places. You're no longer on a ship or in the dusty halls of the palace. You're walking through the bustling streets of Istanbul, and the air is filled with the vibrant energy of a living city. The scent of spices, the sound of music, and the sight of colourful fabrics all blend together in a dazzling mosaic. You're about to explore the profound cultural impact of the Sultanate of Women, a legacy that extended far beyond politics and architecture. These women were not just rulers, they were tastemakers, patrons and trendsetters whose influence shaped the art, fashion and social life of the Ottoman capital for generations. The mainstream historical fact here is that the women of the harem were a crucial force in the cultural life of the empire. They were highly educated in music, poetry, art and literature, and they were often patrons of artists and scholars. Hürrem Sultan, for example, was a poet in her own right, and she corresponded with her husband Suleiman in verse. Her love of poetry and art was reflected in the court culture of the time, which saw a flowering of artistic expression. The women of the harem would often commission works of art, including miniatures and calligraphy, and they would host lavish parties and cultural events in their palaces. They were a bit like the Medici family of Florence, but with more silk and a lot more political power. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the fascinating role of the women's fashion in the Ottoman Empire. The women of the harem were the ultimate trendsetters, and their fashion choices were a powerful way of signalling their status and their influence. They would often wear lavish silks and jewels, and they would have their own personal tailors and jewellers. The most famous example of this is the fashion of the women during the tulip period of the 18th century, a time of peace and prosperity. The women of the harem would wear elaborate dresses with wide skirts and high heels, and their hair would be decorated with jewels and flowers. This was a clear departure from the more traditional modest fashion of the past, and it was a reflection of the growing influence of European fashion and the increasing power of the women of the court. It's a bit like a modern-day fashion influencer, but with more power and a lot more jewels. This brings us to an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the cultural impact of these women was a sign of the empire's cosmopolitanism or a symptom of its decline. Did their embrace of European fashion and art show that the Ottoman Empire was a forward-thinking, multicultural society, or did it show that it was losing its traditional values and becoming too westernized? The truth is, it was probably a bit of both. The Ottoman Empire was always a multicultural society, a melting pot of different cultures and traditions. But the growing influence of European fashion and art was a sign that the empire was changing, and that the women of the harem were at the forefront of that change. The women of the harem were not just patrons of the arts, they were also patrons of social life. They would often host lavish parties and cultural events in their palaces, and these events would be attended by the most powerful people in the empire. These parties were not just for fun, they were also a way of building alliances and conducting diplomacy. The women of the harem would use these events to introduce their allies to the sultan, to forge alliances with foreign dignitaries, and to gather intelligence. It was a kind of social diplomacy, a way of using their social connections to shape the course of politics. You're walking now through the bustling streets of Istanbul, the air thick with the scent of spices and the sound of music. You can almost feel the weight of history hanging in the air. The women of the harem were not just isolated figures, they were a powerful and active part of the cultural life of the empire. They were the ultimate trendsetters, and their tastes and preferences influenced the art, fashion and social life of the Ottoman capital for generations. They were a brief, dazzling, and ultimately fleeting moment in history. A window into a world where a woman's word could move mountains, even if she couldn't be seen or heard by the common people. Their cultural legacy is a testament to their power, their intelligence, and their ambition. They were a brief, dazzling, and ultimately fleeting moment in history. A window into a world where a woman's word could move mountains, even if she couldn't be seen or heard by the common people. The Sultanate of women has ended, but their stories will be told forever. Their influence was not just limited to the palace walls, it extended across the globe, and their stories are a testament to the fact that power can be found in the most unexpected of places. The Sultanate of women has ended, but their stories will be told forever. You're no longer in Istanbul or on a ship, but in a quiet, contemplative space. The vibrant sounds of the city have faded, and the air is still and silent. The grand drama has ended, the players have taken their final bows, and all that remains is a lingering sense of history and a quiet question. What was the legacy of the powerful Ottoman women? You're about to reflect on their lasting impact and the historical debates surrounding their remarkable era. This is the final chapter, a quiet wind-down where we consider the echoes of their power and the lessons their stories hold for us today. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Sultanate of women, while a brief and tumultuous period, had a profound and lasting impact on the Ottoman Empire. These women, through their political savvy, their architectural patronage, and their diplomatic connections, not only kept the empire from collapsing during a period of intense instability, but also left an indelible mark on its culture and its physical landscape. The mosques, schools, and hospitals they built are still a part of the fabric of Istanbul, a constant reminder of their presence and their power. They proved that women, even in a deeply patriarchal society, could be a powerful force for change. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the fascinating role of the historical novels and television shows about this era. In recent years, the story of Hürrem Sultan and the Sultanate of women has been immortalized in popular media, most notably in the hit Turkish television series Muhteşem Yüzyıl, The Magnificent Century. This show, while fictionalized, has brought the story of these women to a global audience, and it has sparked a renewed interest in their lives and their legacies. It's a bit like a modern-day Greek myth, a retelling of a historical story that has captured the imagination of millions. It's a testament to the enduring power of their stories and a reminder that history is not just a collection of dusty facts, but a living, breathing narrative that continues to inspire and fascinate us. This brings us to an open scholarly debate. historians still argue about the overall impact of the Sultanate of Women on the Ottoman Empire. Some scholars see it as a golden age of female empowerment, a time when women were able to rise to positions of immense power and influence. They point to the women's patronage of the arts and their role in stabilising the empire during a period of chaos as proof of their positive impact. Other scholars, however, see it as a period of decline and decay, a time when the harem, a place of intrigue and political infighting, became the centre of power, and the empire suffered as a result. They point to the assassination of Kösem Sultan and the constant power struggles as proof of the destabilising effect of female rule. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle. The Sultanate of Women was a complex and contradictory era, a time of both great achievement and great tragedy. The legacy of these women is not just about their political power, it's also about their resilience, their intelligence, and their ambition. They were women who came from nothing, from slavery and obscurity, and who rose to become queens and regents. They were women who had to contend with a world that was often hostile to them, and they had to learn to play a dangerous game and play it well. They were masters of diplomacy, of finance, of architecture, and of politics. They were, in a word, formidable. You're walking now through a quiet, sun-drenched courtyard, the sound of water trickling from a nearby fountain. The air is warm and still, and you can almost feel the weight of history hanging in the air. The grand drama of the Sultanate of Women has ended, but the quiet, persistent presence of these women still lingers in the air. Their stories are a testament to the incredible resilience, intelligence, and ambition of a group of women who, against all odds, rose to power in a world of men. They were a brief, dazzling, and ultimately fleeting moment in history, a window into a world where a woman's word could move mountains even if she couldn't be seen or heard by the common people. The Sultanate of Women has ended, but their stories will be told forever. Now, as the final rays of sunlight fade from the sky and the stars begin to appear, let the last images of these powerful women drift away. The intricate mosaics, the whisper of silk, the glint of a sultan's gaze, the quiet strength of a woman in a world of men. It's time to let it all go, to let your mind empty and your body relax. The journey is over, the story is told. Sleep now, and let the gentle rhythm of the night carry you away, far from the whispers of the past. Sweet dreams.